Well, hi there. So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at two different markets. And actually, in this one, we're going to look at like one of the two markets, and the other one, we're looking at the other one. So maybe there's one market, actually. The two markets are just markets for money. And that's kind of a strange thing to think about for just a moment to conceptualize. But just like everything else, there could be a market for it. And in terms of these two markets, one of them is for all of the money, right? So like all of the different reasons that you might have money or need money. And then the other market is for a special subset of money that's borrowed money, and we call that the loanable funds market. And actually, I think that these two are fairly straightforward, although sometimes students are like, all of the shifters mess me up. So what I really encourage you to do is if you feel like the shifters or you're like, I don't know if I'm really good on that, is make a little cheat sheet, like a little index card with all the shifters for money market and then the shifters for loanable funds market. And maybe have another index card ready to go for the shifters for just supply and demand in general. And that way you can kind of see like, what are the shifters for aggregate demand? All the shifters, there's a lot of them, right? And so that's my suggestion is right before you get too far into this stuff, make a little flashcard and that'll help. So let's start with the money market. The first thing is that the source of the money market, right, for the supply is the central bank. So we learned about this just in the last couple of videos. And so the three tools are, you've got the discount rate, the reserve requirement, and open market operations. And those things can increase or decrease the money supply, right? So we kind of know what the money supply comes from is from the central bank. They create the money, and then we kind of see where it goes. Man, my hair is like, oh, look at that. It's just like randomly sticking up today. Isn't that fun? The money demand is actually also kind of an interesting one to really think about. Like, who demands money, right? The source of money demand in general is just like the need for money to do stuff by firms and households. So it's like you and me need money to do things with. John Maynard Keynes, I'll come back to him again. You know, he's one of the first to really think about like, why do we need money? And he kind of categorizes the three things that are the sources of money demand as transactions demand, speculative demand, and precautionary demand. And I think those are helpful ways to think about like why does demand exist for money? We need money in order to do transactions, so that was what the transaction demand is, right? So if there's more transactions happening, then there's more transaction demand for money. So if we have a bigger economy, you have more money demand because there's literally more transactions happening. Another one is speculative demand, and that's the idea that, you know, in some economies, you would have a need for money to conduct investments, right? In terms of lowercase I, stocks, bonds, and real estate. And so we need money to do that. And then we also need money in precautions. And so sometimes people just need money to hang on to it just in case. And those are kind of, you know, influenced. If you have a instability, right, in your society, you might have more precautionary demand. So really anything that kind of affects that idea is kind of helpful. We're going to get into the shifters later, but I think it's useful to kind of think about like, why does there money demand? Money demand also has a downward slope, and I'll draw the graph here in just a second. But that's because when you have money, you're foregoing the opportunity to earn something with that money by putting that money into something else. So we would say that like as kind of interest rates, which is the price of the money, if you could lend it out to somebody else, if interest rates are really high, there's a really opportunity cost for you to just have some cash, right? So think about it, if you had $1,000 and interest rates were sky high, you could lend it out and make a lot of money. So it's a very high opportunity cost for you to hold it. So people don't really want to hold a lot of money in periods of high interest rates. At the same time, in periods of very low interest rates, people are like, it's okay. It doesn't matter if we hang on to a lot of cash. And so they're willing to kind of have more quantity demanded of money sitting in their checking accounts. So when we have this money market, right, you've got quantity of money just down here, as we might expect. And up here is the price of money, but we don't say price. It's weird. Excuse me. We say interest rates, lowercase I for interest rate. And so you've got a downward sloping money demand, and just DM is fine there. Again, that's because at low interest rate, right, you've got relatively low cost to holding on to money. And so there's kind of a larger quantity demanded of money because you're like, it's not that painful. There's much less quantity demanded of money if you're way up here with a really high interest rate, because again, it's costly to do that. And that example that I give you kind of below is where what you're foregoing, right? Is kind of really think about, you could put your money in $100 in a 6-month CD earning 50% interest. You'd be like, I'm going to put that in there. But if it's only going to earn 0.5% interest, you're not so much worried about it. You probably just hang on to the cash and it doesn't matter. The supply of money is just fixed, right? We have some quantity, right? We'd say like Q star of money that exists, and the supply can shift to the right, and that would be an increase, and it could decrease and shift to the left. But those are done by the central bank. The central bank just says this is how much money we want to create, and so that's why it's a vertical line. The intercept of the two is the equilibrium interest rate in the economy. So I'll put I star there. Obviously, an increase is to the right. So if you had more money demand, right, what would happen? Well, you think about, you can sketch it out over here. If you had more money demand, so you go from D to D1, what happens to the interest rate? Well, the interest rate goes up. But what happens to the quantity of money in the system? Stays the same. And that's because the Fed is the one that actually changes kind of that quantity in that regard. And so if the Fed changed the supply of money, that would affect both the interest rate and the quantity. But if it's just a change in money demand, it's just going to be on that horizontal line. Now, the three shifters of money supply, we actually wrote them up here, right? Changing in the discount rate. And so that's the rate that banks pay when they borrow from the Fed. Changing the reserve requirement, which again is the amount that banks have to hold, and then open market operations, which are buying and selling of bonds. And so you have to know, like when you do a buy bonds, makes money supply bigger. If you lower the reserve requirement, makes money. You have to kind of know that as part of this discussion. I got to pause. Hang on. Okay, so sorry about that. So actually, somebody had to come into my room. So now let's talk quickly about the money demand shifters. And it's useful here to think about that it's really anything that changes people's need for money at any and all interest rates. So like regardless of the interest rate, that people would have more need for money or would have more or less need for money. So first and foremost would be an unexpected change in prices. If there's a higher price level, then there's going to be more need for transaction money, so the increase in money demand would happen. If there's a change in GDP, right? If there's more transactions happening, I'm going to keep saying that, then there's going to be more goods and services that people need to buy, and then there's more demand for money. Another one is changes in money technology. So if there's something that comes along that makes it fairly easy for people to use money, and they don't have to hold on to it, then it can reduce the money demand. So for example, before ATMs and before it was relatively easy to get your money out of a checking account, people often carried around lots more cash. If you talk to older people, they'll often carry much more cash than younger people. And that's because of the transition to more money technologies. Another one is changes in institutions and political and economic stability. I alluded this to at the beginning, that basically if you're worried about the stability of your country, you're going to hold on to more money as a precaution. But if there's more stability, then you're okay with investing your money into stocks, bonds, and real estate. And so you don't really need as much money in those cases, right? You're kind of pushing it off into other stuff. And then this is the last thing to kind of share here is a reminder of bond prices and interest rates. And that's really just that discussion that we already had, that basically if the interest rates go up, then prices of bonds go down and vice versa. All right, hopefully this helped you. I'll see you next time.